My next guest is Evan Smith, a co-founder and the CEO of Altana, which uses AI to help governments and the private sector build safe, resilient, and sustainable supply chains. Welcome, Evan.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Evan, I briefly described your company, but can you give us a little background of, number one, the company and also its role in the world supply chain?
Sure. We're a New York City-based startup. We're almost 5 years into this. And we are building a shared source of truth for the global supply chain. So we connect governments, enterprises, logistics service providers, and even financial service providers into a common operating picture that shows all the companies and product flows and sort of physical movements of goods all around the world. And what we do to build that picture of the world is we connect both public and non-public data through federated machine learning. So imagine a hub and spoke federated architecture where all the world's public and non-public data are being crunched by our platform. And we produce this sort of rendered, derived picture of what is roughly half the world's physical economy today in near real time.
You mentioned it's been 5 years, so let's talk about the pandemic. How did that change everything?
It accelerated some things we expected to be true in the sense that we built the company and founded the company on the thesis that the globalization of the last 75 years was going to fall apart. So whether it's COVID or some of the geopolitical dislocation that's happening today, the kind of founding perspective that we had was that supply chains were going to break, and it was going to be very important to kind of know who was in your extended supply chain network and begin to manage supply chains, not as buyer-supplier relationships alone, but as the entire sort of extended network of production. So that's been absolutely accelerating our business. And I think one of the things we were surprised by with COVID was we saw supply chains go from sort of an operational consideration to more of a strategic board level, C-suite level consideration. And so the buyer in our world has changed pretty dramatically.
But in what ways, if you can expound upon that?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. So CEOs, COOs, CFOs are now focused on supply chains, not just in the sense of getting goods somewhere on time or being able to receive goods you've purchased on time, but even as a license to operate. So there's intense sort of geopolitical and compliance and even intellectual property risks that are embedded in supply chains that are all coming to the fore today. So if you are selling electronics overseas, suddenly all these commerce restrictions on Russian sanctions, they turn into really like a fundamental license to operate. If you're importing apparel into the United States, suddenly the ban on forced labor products could impact hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions of dollars of procurement you've already committed to. So supply chain is sort of moving away from the back office, make sure things arrive on time kind of mindset to really like this is our license to do business in the world.
Mm-hmm. And what's your advice? Now we're obviously coming out of the pandemic, but potential obstacles and problems don't go away, right?
They don't. I think if anything, it's getting worse, not better. So, again, it's not just about moving a package from point A to point B and whether it gets stuck at the port. I mean, that's sort of yesterday's problem. If you look at the confluence of geopolitical competition, the big set of regulations coming in Europe and the US and UK on labor rights, on ESG in the supply chain, all the investor demands around sustainability. And if you look at some of the sort of climate-related disasters that are sort of breaking things in one part of the world and causing ripple effects in another part of the world, I think all these things point to a current state and a future state that's more volatile, more dislocated. And so, again, you need to begin managing these supply chains as networks. You have to engage much more proactively with your extended supplier base. You have to engage proactively with your regulators as you move things across borders. So this is going to move from, again, a sort of back office function of moving boxes around the world to really a C-suite level strategic kind of function.
Evan, what's your take on, you mentioned regulations in ESG, and obviously there are certain things and many things that have to be regulated, but where's the fine line of effective regulation, but also not harming the economy?
Well, we're sort of living through an experiment in real time as it relates to Russia's war in Ukraine, right? So you see a coordinated effort to sanction Russian entities to prevent the flows of goods into Russia on the one hand, or to prevent the flows out of Russia on the other hand. And the West, I think, has gone through a lot of tension in wanting to balance the economic imperatives, and especially in a very fragile moment of Western economies, with the real desire to sort of counteract the invasion. So I think looking back over the last 18 months, what you've seen is when it came down to it, the government acted, has mostly relied on the private sector to catch up. It's kind of been fascinating to see natural gas supplies rebound into Europe and sort of make up for the lost pipeline inputs from Russia. So that's one example of many where I think governments here are on a course to regulate, to put up barriers, and the private sector is being expected to keep up. I don't know that that's sort of the right choice in every case, but I think that's the choice that's being made generally.
In Washington, D.C., Congress obviously reacted to the pandemic by passing a slew of legislation. Some of it was bipartisan. Some of it wasn't. Some of it dealt with supply chains with the CHIPS legislation that got signed into law. Yep. What's been the effect of that?
Well, I think I would put the IRA and CHIPS into the same bucket of explicit industrial policy, right? Where we've moved as a nation from sort of a free trade, neoliberal, neoconservative mindset to one of economic competition in the world, and a recognition that supply chains are the theater for much of this geopolitical and economic competition that's taking place. So in the CHIPS Act and in the IRA, what you've seen is both sort of positive interventions with the availability of money, and very negative interventions to curtail, the flows of technology or money or investment, or the movement of goods. And I think that's a portend of things to come. I think that's going to be sort of rising as a policy tool, not diminishing.
Every industry now is talking about the future of AI and how it affects their industries. What is the future of AI in this space?
Well, we are working to build that. So in supply chains, you've got a disconnected, siloed, but extremely data-rich global picture. The opportunity is to connect that data, to learn from that data, and to bring visibility and decision-making into an AI-enabled framework. That has operational benefits, it has compliance benefits, it can have ESG benefits, it can have risk management, security benefits, but you have to get the data. So I think what's happening at this stage in the game is, with large language models able to operate on vast quantities of text data, and with things like federated learning, which is what our company is pioneering in the supply chain space, you can not only connect previously, siloed, orphaned, disconnected data with federation, but you can start to build a shared source of truth across all of that siloed data and do things that were previously completely impossible. So show me where the raw materials for this pair of jeans coming into the country actually comes from. Ask a question of a machine, what happens to my business if China invades Taiwan? And have that answer contextualized in terms of your product families, the revenue associated with each product, the multi-tier value chains associated with each of those products, and the understanding of the question of, what happens in this geopolitical scenario. So in short, AI is on the verge of changing everything. This is a text data domain. The big breakthroughs in the last year have been around text data, large language models. And, the pace is picking up on an accelerating basis.
You look at a lot of data, as you've talked about, both public and private. What are your views kind of on the economy in the United States and globally? Are you able to see anything in this vast wealth of data that shows some signs?
In terms of a kind of macroeconomic outlook,
exactly,
in the U.S. or otherwise?
Yep.
I think what we can say is that the conditions that impacted the supply side of the macroeconomic equation, so the supply chain constraints, the logistics bottlenecks, the manufacturing capacity limits, those things generally aren't going to get better anytime soon. The demand side of the equation with all the money printing and stimulation, I won't speak to, but on the supply side, I think we're going to be living through years, if not decades, of regionalization of supply chains, of fracturing of what would otherwise be like just-in-time, highly efficient supply chains as the world dislocates. And if anything, we've seen that in the data that we process. A lot of nearshoring or regionalization, the cessation of typical supply chain links, in particular out of China into other parts of the world. So those supply side parts of the macroeconomic equation are not getting more efficient or cheaper anytime soon. So that all points to me toward an era of more sustained inflation, higher interest rates, and everything that comes from that.
Mm-hmm. Last question. Your company has grown significantly. What's the future of the next 1 to 5 years for Altana?
In the next 1 to 2 years, it's just executing like crazy and leaning heavily into this AI moment. We've built a really globally unique data network and data asset, and the kinds of questions our customers are looking to solve are, strategic decision-making, task automation, and those are the kinds of things that lend themselves very well to AI. So that's one. In 5 years, I would see us as public. So we're looking to build the Google Maps of supply chain. We want to be the shared source of truth for the world's, licit economy to come into a common operating picture on the supply chain. So that means powering other applications, powering other services, and building an enduring business. And in our world, that means you've got to go public.
Well, that's a big and bold plan. We've run out of time. Evan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program. A big thank you to all of our guests and to all of you for watching. For those of you who missed any of the conversations this afternoon, we'll have the video up from the event on our website, thehill.com, shortly. I'm Bob Cusack. I hope you have a great rest of your day.